Hello everyone, Sandria here, and welcome to my August 2023 Life and Channel update video. And let's see, so the big things for this month are I've been continuing to work on... One of those things that's really tricky is trying to remember what I talked about last month. And but I've been working on this RPG that is my current RPG Maker MV project. Just as a reminder, it's one of those things where I'm realizing I have a tendency to have design ideas that I try, and then they don't quite work out, and then I get stuck, and then I have to kind of back up, and there's too much residual stuff there, and I just kind of need to start over with something kind of fresh. So what I've been doing with this one is I've been forcing myself to actually spend some time in like planning phase, with the advantage of having a lot more experience with some of this stuff, so I can actually maybe do that. It is a struggle for me. It is not a natural pattern of behavior for me. So spending time planning is more of an effort. It's harder for me to get myself into doing and these sorts of things. So I'm trying to get better at that, but it is not something I'm naturally inclined towards. So there is some challenge there, but I'm also making some good progress. Figuring out my setting, figuring out and fleshing out characters. So it was actually very interesting. I ended up earlier in the month, I think. Boy, I'm trying to keep months straight. It can get confusing sometimes. But I ended up deciding to watch a bunch of Naruto because it's free with ads on YouTube. And I was just kind of like curious to actually, like, I've watched through a bunch of it at one point in time, but it's been, well, it's very interesting watching, seeing as their budget increases over the course of the show. But it was really interesting and really well timed, in that there's a lot of stuff that they do with their character development. A lot of it is rooted in character motivations and things. And so what I'm trying to do with the RPG I'm making was like, okay, I want to do something that's more of a, and I think I mentioned this last time, but more of a character-focused story. Something where it's following the set of 4 characters because that's the default party size in RPG Maker MV. And following those specific characters and their journey and trying to make something that's a little bit more of a linear story. And what Naruto does is provides a, like, there's enough character complexity there that there's something to see, but there's not so much that it like is hard to see because it's so complicated, right? So it's this really good level where I was watching it and it hit me in like the right analytical part of my brain, to see what they're doing with setting up character motivations and how the past informs current actions and how characters kind of change and modify their thinking over time, and how they're passing on stuff that with things that they're doing. And so there's a lot of like character interrelationship things there that I was really noticing when I was watching it. And the last time I had really watched it would have been like way back in college. So it was like, oh, the difference in perspective. If you observe media, it's this weird thing that I've observed in myself, where when you observe or are told a story or otherwise take in media as a kid, you are unable to witness certain nuances, certain details. But you get the overall gist of the story, or you can, depending upon the story and how parsable it is for a younger perspective. And what I found happened with me is that I'm like, okay, so now I know what the story is, so I might not be paying as much attention to details that I would now pick up on if I was paying attention. This is especially true with video games, where it's like, as a player of a game, you're engaging first and foremost with the game mechanics most of the time, not necessarily with the narrative in the same degree, or especially if it's a repeat playthrough, right? So like I observed this with Guild Wars 1, where I felt I had a general understanding of what was going on, and for years just leaned back on that understanding that I had when I first played the game when I was like, I don't know, 17 or whatever. And later, when I did the slow playthrough several years ago, which I'll probably include that since I brought it up, I'll probably include it in one of the end things. So just watch until the end, and there'll be a link to it. But when I did that slow playthrough, I intentionally went slowly and re-engaged with the narrative and world building at a level that I typically hadn't done up to that point. And I observed so many things that I had missed on my initial playthrough because I wasn't looking at that level of detail. I wasn't sophisticated enough in my thinking to absorb it. And the same thing happened with Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask. When I played through those with my sister, I will also... that will be the other thing that I link at the end of this, if I remember. But when I played through those with my sister for this channel, we looked at those more closely as well, and again, picking up details, picking up things that I just missed. And I'm like, oh, I know what would happen because I remembered, all the times that I played it, but I was missing all that detail and nuance. So the same sort of thing I think happened with Naruto, and I think it happens with storytelling in general as well, of like, if you go back to a story and you intentionally re-engage with it afresh, which requires, like I said, intentionality, then you can pick up a lot of detail and nuance that you would have missed when you were younger. So anyway, to get back onto my main point, there was a lot of really good example of team, like intra-team dynamics as well as inter-team dynamics. So within the teams as well as between teams, of character dynamics and relationship dynamics and stuff, and the importance of character backstory and stuff. So there's a lot of really good stuff, and I made a big old, not that big, but I made some notes on like, okay, here are things that I'm observing from this that I want to make sure I'm thinking about when I'm making characters. And it just so happens that it matches really well with what I was already planning on doing with my world building for this RPG. And I've been fleshing out other world building background elements, and I've also been thinking about mechanics. One of the things that I'm wanting to do with it is I'm wanting to focus the player heavily on crafting. Not the player themselves, but using a Guild Wars 1 style crafting system where you bring crafting materials to an NPC and they will make stuff for you as a predominant form, but as the main way of getting things, equipment and consumables and stuff. I think that creates a more distributed reward mechanism, and it allows you to reward like part of a potion and not a whole potion, things like that. But I've also been spending some solid time, particularly more recently, kind of figuring out how I wanted to handle my damage formula, particularly armor formula. So one of the things that I find that I'm wanting to try to figure out a good method for doing is having it where armor, like I don't want armor to be effectively a flat percentile reduction. So for example, let's say you're dealing 100 damage to something. There are different ways that you could calculate out a scalar on that damage. You could do an attack to defense ratio, which is, if I remember correctly, functionally what Pokemon does. So where you have attack divided by defense, and maybe you have some other modifiers in there, but you're functionally just taking attack versus defense times damage to get out a damage value. And like with Pokemon, for example, you have types that you attach onto the end there, and you have some stuff with levels going on and things like that. But functionally, at the basic core level, it's a quotient. You can also do like an exponential curve. So that's what Guild Wars 1 does, where it takes... it's functionally like they call it like... Oh, I can't remember exactly the exact term that people use for it, but it's like strike level and armor level, but it's basically like attack minus defense, so 2 to attack minus defense over 40, so you have an exponent. What that ends up doing is that creates a curve where every 40 more defense halves damage, every 40 more attack doubles damage, is functionally what's going on there. And there's some other things with how those things are derived, but that has certain things it does, but it's still a multiplier on damage, right? So if you'll have the same multiplier with the same attack and the same defense, functionally in that system. And there's other ways that you could do stuff. You could do straight subtraction, but the problem with straight subtraction is it makes armor extremely good. Where it's like, oh, if you have 50 defense, it just cuts 50 off of any incoming damage. And it's like, okay, it doesn't do that much if damage is really big, but if damage is really small, it does a lot. And so it doesn't scale well. That's the nice thing about multipliers. So there's a lot of complications with how different systems like these work. So, for example, the quotient style system has a problem where you can get, if numbers get too extremely off of each other, you have, so like basically if the system is too offensive, you can shift it one way or the other, but you can't like, I'm not expressing this very well. This is a problem that I had in a previous RPG Maker MV game that I remember having, where functionally I could either have the system have things where stuff was hitting too hard or not hard, or stuff wasn't hitting hard enough. But because of the way the quotients work, as you fiddle with it, it rolls up and down this line, where more attack, like if you favor attack functionally in the system, then you can kind of get attack running away, where your numbers end up being way too big. And the problem with numbers getting too big is like the player is one-shotting stuff too quickly and fights are over way too fast and things like that, where it can also mean that stats are eclipsing other things. If you want, for example, damage types to be irrelevant, you can run into problems with that. So it's hard. Like you can't make attack. You can't simultaneously pull in both attack and defense. You're favoring one or the other. An exponent allows you to basically determine how wide you want things to go. So that's nice with the exponential type system like Guild Wars 1 uses, where you have attack minus defense over a value, and then a base brought to that, usually 2 or whatever. You probably want it to be small. A small number like 2, maybe 3, but that's going to be pretty aggressive. But that denominator in the... this is very mathy, so I hope I'm not losing all the people who aren't here for math. But what happens and what's great about that sort of system is increasing the exponent, or increasing the divisor in that exponent reduces the effect of both attack and defense simultaneously. So that means like increasing it reduces the impact of attack and defense. So that means you're more often going to have things that are at the raw attack value, right? Because you're going to be closer to a 0 exponent, which gets you a multiplier of 1. But you can shrink it and they'll both get bigger, right? So the impact of both will increase because you're going to more rapidly be able to move away from a multiplier of 1. So there's some value to those different systems and the way that they operate, and I'm talking about experience from trying out different damage formulas here. But one of the things that I like as an idea is, and this is something that I was trying to do with my previous Astria damage formula, was sufficiently high damage can't really be protected against, kind of like a subtractor, but I want the benefit of the multiplication where it kind of scales as well, so it doesn't completely cut off low damage. Anyway, all of that to say, I've had an idea that I've wanted to try out with what I'd refer to as a like progressive armor system, where, so for those who don't know how progressive taxes work, which I imagine is a lot of people, you hear about different tax brackets, but what it functionally means is if you make, let's just throw out $100,000 as the model. I'm not pulling any specific numbers from anywhere, but like the first, say, $20,000 is not taxed. So then you have $80,000 above that. So maybe the next $40,000 you make, so between $20,000 and $60,000, is maybe taxed at, like, say, 10%. So however much you make in that bracket is taxed at 10%, up to a maximum of, $40,000 of those dollars. And then maybe there's another bracket that's from 60 to 80 that's taxed at 15%. So it's a higher tax rate for the amount of money that's in that spot. And then maybe the last amount is taxed at, say, 30%, between 80 and 100. for this example. So if you made like 85,000, you would have 5,000 taxed at that 30%, right? But if you made 100,000, then all of the area in between, but it's only the money in between. So that idea of a progressive system where the first amount is done at this rate, and then the next amount is done at this rate, and then the next amount is done at this rate, seems like a really interesting thing to attempt to apply to an armor formula, or the armor portion of a damage formula. So I spent a bunch of time trying to figure out how to make that work, and I eventually came up with something that I quite like. So maybe if people are interested, I might make a video. I rigged it up in a spreadsheet, so maybe I can go into the damage formula there once I've figured out the particulars a bit more. That could be fun. But the long story short is, as your defense goes up, it adjusts which bracket your starting damage coming in starts at. So if you have no armor, you just take all of the damage. If you have some armor, some of the damage will get reduced, but not all of it. Will get reduced by a bracket. As you increase your defense, more and more brackets come into play that reduce the damage more and more. So it's something that I want to kind of play around with and see how it functions. The good news is, I was thinking about this earlier, because I'm overall really liking a lot of the world building that I'm planning on doing with this RPG. And I know with Astria, one of the spots I really got bogged down in was with armor. If this formula doesn't work, I don't think it should have too big of a ramification on the overall plans for defense or for equipment. Like, it should be able to be adjusted without it being as big of an ordeal, hopefully, is kind of where I'm thinking things will land and end up. But anyway, so I've been working on this RPG and trying to figure out how I want to do stuff and finding inspiration in all these sorts of random places. The other thing I've been doing is I don't remember if I mentioned this last time or not either, but I got back into Guild Wars 2. One of those things where I'm like, I've been hearing people say, yeah, but the expansions are better. Like, the core experience is not as good as the expansion experience. And I remember, because I'd played through Heart of Thorns back when that first came out, that I'm like, I didn't feel that way about Heart of Thorns. But I eventually decided, you know what, I'm going to give there's the sales that it went on. And I decided, you know what, I will pick up the pack that comes with Path of Fire and End of Dragons, and just see. And I'm really quite happy to report that I am enjoying those expansions considerably more. I also did get the Secrets of the Obscure as well, the most recent one. There's something that I've been thinking about of like, okay, what is the difference? Because a lot of it, there's a couple of different things that I think they've done that address a lot of the reasons why I did not enjoy the core, or why I found the core experience to get boring. And the reason the core experience got boring for me, the original release, after several months, I realized I wasn't having fun playing it. And the reason why, it is all centered around combat. I still do not like the crafting system. It's too grindy. And I feel like there's a lot of things that they've done. Like, there's a lot of systems that I feel like, okay, maybe this wasn't the best decision, but they're having to work with it. And they're slapping on fixes to try to address the problems inherent in the system. So, like, their crafting system is super grindy because you have to make a bunch of stuff to be able to level up to actually make useful things, right? And so they add this research notes thing to be able to take the output from that grind and do something useful with it. I'm like, okay, I see where you're coming from with this. It's a way to try to find a solution to a problem that your system creates. But yeah, that sort of thing does cause spiraling complexity. It's a little bit of an issue, but anyway, not the worst that they're making you funnel through that system, but that's another discussion entirely. Because there's a lot that I really liked about Guild Wars 2. I enjoyed seeing the continuation of the lore. I enjoyed the music, although this is one of those weird things with music where I would have preferred remixes of Guild Wars 1 music than just reusing Guild Wars 1 music. And the reason for that is because Guild Wars 1 music was used in very specific areas, and it's connected in my brain to those areas. So when I hear, for example, a pre-searing song when I'm walking through Guild Wars 2 Cried Out, I'm like, this is out of place. This song doesn't belong here. It belongs to this other place. So it's a connection thing. It's like if you are... I'm suddenly remembering watching like a VatiVidya video for like Dark Souls lore type things, and suddenly it's the music from the Crystal Desert from like Ascension or something from Guild Wars 1. And I'm like, whoa! It knocked me out of it a little bit because I'm like, I know that music. That doesn't belong there. All right, like entirely different set of associations. But it's kind of like if you are watching one of the Lord of the Rings movies, if the music was moved around, it starts to feel like this music doesn't belong here. Or you hear one of the tracks from it, and it's like it connects directly to that thought, that memory. And so hearing it again is like, wait, why is this here? And that sort of music is a shortcut to memory and stuff as well, and that's why they put so much like history and other things to music, because it helps you memorize it. But anyway, overall, like the music, but I really like the visuals and the art style of Guild Wars 2 a lot. There's a lot that I really liked about Guild Wars 2. So it kind of has disappointed me that I didn't enjoy the combat gameplay. And they did a lot to address some of the fundamental issues. And I think it's a combination of design on the skills for players, but more on enemy design. Because the problem that I had was that I felt like I didn't have meaningful decisions in combat. It was just use all of my skills as soon as they're available to do as much damage as I can to an enemy to defeat it as soon as possible. And the enemy didn't really do anything interesting. Every enemy was approached the exact same way. And they've done a lot more to kind of address that. One of the things is they're using a lot more danger puddles, which is what they say on Playframe, or danger pools if you want to call them that. But the little reticles indicating, oh, there's an attack that's going to be here. That by itself does a lot to help with making positioning feel relevant. Because one of the problems with base Guild Wars 2 is it felt like positioning wasn't really relevant. The only way to dodge attacks was with a dodge button. And so having that change really helped. I think they've overall lowered a lot of the cooldowns as well, which also helps feel like you're able to use your skills more. But there's also just a greater sense of utility, because enemies are doing things that you want to respond to. So feeling like, oh, I need to have my condition cleansing options. I need my stun break options. These sorts of like... I've been playing a lot of, like, my main character is a Vindicator right now, which is their version of a Dragoon. It's fun jumping up. But the interplay between, okay, I want to jump because that buffs my damage, but then that uses my stamina, so then I use this other skill in order to restore my endurance, I guess is what it is. But in order to restore my endurance or energy, whatever that, I don't know, whatever the exact thing is, but in order to be able to restore that, to be able to do more jumps, and like the interplay between that and when do I want to switch and what tools am I getting access to so I can do boon stripping off of enemies or condition cleansing for myself. It feels like there's more intricacy in how I'm engaging with and interacting with enemies than there was originally. And I don't know exactly, it's probably been a slow burn for a lot of that stuff, but I think that there's been a lot of things that they've done that have really helped with a lot of that. That said, a lot of the elite specializations have more interesting elite skills. Double checking myself there because I'm using the word elite twice, but it's the same word used for two different things. I don't quite like the ultimate style of elites that the game particularly focused on when it shipped. And I think that they've done a good job of making a lot of the elite specialization elite skills feel like they're in a better spot, particularly with not having minutes-long cooldowns. I do think a bunch of the core skills should be revisited, and they did this with the Guardian. because they decided to change it so the Guardian no longer had those weird tome spells for elites, where you'd like change your is like a engineer kit. But they decided to change that up, which I think was a good move. But that means that the Guardians' core skill, non-elite specialization skill line elites are more interesting to use, because it's like I've been playing a lot of an elementalist as I've been doing other things, and it's like I always just use the glyph elite because the fiery greatsword has like a 3-minute cooldown timer, and the tornado just feels absolutely terrible and has an even longer cooldown timer. And it's like these cooldown timers are super long on these, so I'd rather use the one that's 40 seconds and summons me a minion. And I would like there to feel like there's more build diversity in the elites area, is basically what I'm saying. That's another overarching, like, beside the point sort of thing. But anyway, so that's been a bunch of thoughts for things that have happened. I feel like there's probably been some other stuff that might be worth mentioning. I don't know. I've been continuing to enjoy Magic, as you can see, but I need to go through and like audit and update a bunch of my old decks. That's another thing entirely. I would like to find a regular playgroup for non-draft, but that's a process. How do you find people for that sort of stuff? I don't know. Trying to come up with ideas. We'll see. But I think that's all that I really want to say today. So thank you all very much for being here, for watching this. And until next time, everyone, take care and goodbye.